That is right, after 2 years of quitting teaching, traditional teaching, and swearing that I would never step within 500 feet of another American public school, I am teaching again. So today I want to talk to you about what I've experienced so far upon my return to teaching. It is now January, and so I have had a complete semester to decide how I feel about my new role. Now, I do have a previous video about my previous teaching experience, which I'm not going to talk much about on this video since I already have the other video. So if you are interested in knowing about my initial experience, go ahead and watch that video first. I will say that, to sum it up, it was horrible. Like I said, I swore I would never return. So why did I decide, once I was freed from the torture, why did I decide to go back? So 2 years after quitting my 8th grade ELA teaching position, I started doing like private tutoring. For the most part, I was working with adults who were newly arrived to the country and they were learning English, and I had a few online classes as well. And my experience doing that was almost perfect. I really enjoyed working with adults. I enjoyed working with people who cared about what they were doing. It's different when you're working with someone who actually has an interest in learning, and these are people who are either paying for the classes themselves or their companies are paying for the classes. So the rate was very nice. Hourly, it was significantly more than what a traditional teacher makes. So that was nice, but it was very difficult to work full-time hours. So usually I was working probably around 20 hours a week, which, to be honest, was amazing because I have been just work for a long time. I was a full-time student, working, sometimes full-time, part-time, either or. So I've never really had a whole lot of time to myself outside of work and school and being a mom. So it was nice. It was incredibly nice to have that time to myself. And so after 2 years of doing that and realizing that I could make it work if I really put in the effort, I could have maybe started doing like a full-time business with that. But I felt like it was a lot of work at the beginning to get that ball really rolling, and considering that I don't really feel like that's what I want to do for the rest of my life, I just didn't really feel like the investment was worth it. So additionally, my daughter entered her senior year of high school in August of last year, and if you're a parent, you probably know that for that there are a lot of expenses in a senior year of high school. So I didn't want to play around too much with my income. I wanted to know that I would have something reliable to be able to cover all of those expenses for her this year. And I tried for many months. I was looking for full-time work, either in my field, which is actually psychology. That's what I studied. However, I'm not licensed, so it's kind of difficult to find something unless you are licensed, which is kind of a long process. So that's more of a long-term thing. And after doing application after application after application, I came to find out about something called ghost jobs. Let me know if you've heard about what that is. I think a lot of people have up to this point. So it's this thing that companies are doing now, which is basically posting jobs that they have no intention of hiring anyone for, just to save face, basically. And after taking the time to tailor your resume for each post and then doing the job application, which can take 2 to 3 hours depending on what they ask you. Once I found out about this, I kind of felt hopeless because I was spending so much time doing job applications, and I really had faith. I applied to so many jobs that I met, some of them, all of the requirements, and nobody was calling me. And I know they tell you if you meet all of the requirements, you're overqualified. So I applied to some where I didn't meet all of the requirements, but I met most of them. No phone calls. So I was not getting any interviews, no callbacks whatsoever. So it was starting to get to crunch time. I was getting close to the new school year, and one of my friends mentioned that there was going to be a job fair for the school district that I'm zoned to. After giving it some thought, I decided it wasn't a terrible idea to go. I figured I could go, and if I found something I liked, then good, and if I didn't, then it didn't hurt to actually go. Lo and behold, I went to the job fair and I was offered a position then and there, which was kind of crazy because I went to this job fair with a specific role in mind. So my certification is 4th through 8th grade core subjects. So I could teach social studies, math, ELA, or science. But my real only interest is ELA. So I was hoping to find a 4th grade ELA position. I was walking around talking to several principals or staff from those schools, and I ended up talking to someone about a bilingual position, which I had no interest in because I am not certified in bilingual. So I hadn't been looking into any bilingual roles. However, as I talked to this principal, he told me that they could offer an emergency permit, which I was not aware of. So all of a sudden, in that moment, while I'm at the job fair, everything changed. No longer necessarily wanted a 4th grade ELA. I wanted specifically 4th grade ELA bilingual because I wanted to get as far away from my previous role, which was 8th grade ELA. I didn't want to deal with adolescents because, my goodness, the emotional roller coaster, everything is huge to them. Like, they have meltdowns for everything, and the way that things are right now, they're very entitled. The parents are very entitled. I wanted nothing to do with anything remotely close to that. So I was like, if I can do bilingual, I want to do bilingual. And some people may not like this, but the fact is that the students in bilingual classrooms act very different than the students that are not in bilingual classrooms, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. But basically, I had already done the rounds in the entire job fair. So at that point, when I started talking to this person and realizing we were really having a good conversation, but neither he nor I had realized that I was missing one thing that he needed. He was looking for a 3rd grade teacher, which meant that in addition to the 2 bilingual tests that I would have to take, I would also have to take a test that included 3rd grade. So taking 3 tests, having to pay $120 for each of those tests, and I think there's another fee to validate them or something like that. Afterwards, I wasn't willing to do an additional test. But at that point, I learned, okay, I'm actually able to apply to bilingual positions. So then I went again, and then I started seeing if there were other bilingual positions. There was one school that I was really interested in, and I saw it as a good sign that the entire time I was there, that school had like a crowd around it. So I figured it was a good place to be, and it was very near my home. So when I decided that I would look into teaching again, I said that I would do so, but I would not compromise with any of my requirements. So those requirements for me were that it had to be within a 5-mile radius of where I live, because for many years I had a long commute. My last teaching job, I was driving almost 100 miles a day. I was spending $250 in gas getting to and from work, and I was spending $250 in tolls. So $500 a month just on transportation to and from work. I didn't want to have to deal with that anymore, especially because I was also having car troubles at the time. So that was one requirement: the distance, the location. Another requirement was the grade. I would not take anything above, at first I said 4th or 5th grade, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And once I realized that if I could do bilingual, I was going to find a bilingual position no matter what. So the stipend for bilingual is $4,500. So with that, my master's degree and the little raises that have passed over the past couple of years for teachers in Texas, I would be making close to $10,000 more than I was 2 years ago. So that was all right for me. So I went and I talked to this teacher. She said they did have, I think, 2 open positions, one 5th and one 6th grade ELA position. I told her I was very interested, and she said she had actually printed my resume that morning already because I had already applied for an ELA position for her, but not the bilingual position. So she had already seen my resume. She liked it enough to print it. She said she'd get back to me. After talking to her, I noticed that there was a bilingual table that I hadn't noticed earlier because it wasn't on my radar since I didn't think I could do it. So I stopped by, I talked to them. I wanted to ask them questions regarding what the principal had told me for the 3rd grade position. And they confirmed everything he said, and they kind of walked me through the process of what I needed to do. And all of a sudden, that bilingual table, when I arrived, was empty. Like, I kind of just stood there waiting. Like, there were no employees there to help, presumably because there were not many bilingual applicants, I am assuming. But when I walked up, one person walked up to me, then another person walked up, and all of a sudden there were like 5 staff members, employees for the district, all trying to sell me on the bilingual program. And I was like, this is a good sign, because I live in a district where I'm pretty sure it's kind of difficult to find bilingual applicants, or maybe bilingual applicants that they believe are good enough, let's say. So one of the people who walked up to me actually asked me, would you like me to make the rounds with you? I can introduce you to some principals. I'm like, yes, definitely. So that's what we did. She was gonna take me back to the school that I was interested in, that I had already spoken to the principal too, but as I said, there was a huge crowd at that school. So she's like, well, let's go check out this other one and we'll go back to that one. So we went. And of course, I figured I had already seen these jobs posted at this school that she took me to talk to. And I was like, it doesn't hurt to talk. So we went, and the principal took me into a different room, and he did like an on-the-spot interview. So we were chatting, and the conversation felt like it was flowing, things were going well. So he said he wanted to introduce me to, I think, the head of the bilingual department in his school. So I was like, okay, that's a good sign when they want you to meet someone else. So the other person came. I don't remember what question he asked me, but it was like something kind of silly. Even the principal asked him, like, you have the opportunity to interview someone right here, and that's what you asked. And he was like, well, I think he felt maybe ambushed because it was so on the spot. So basically, from the moment that I walked into that room, that I met the principal, to the end of the interview, it had been 7 minutes, and he offered me the job. And I was kind of shocked. I'm not sure why, because I know that that happens at job fairs, but it had never happened to me. It had never happened to me in a regular interview. I was a little stunned. So I accepted. I accepted on the spot, and I don't think I had the time to realize I could have told him, hey, I really appreciate that, can I get back to you? I didn't have time to like process everything in that moment. So I accepted, and when we walked out of that room where he interviewed me, I kind of like looked around like that because I still wanted to go talk to the other schools. The lady who introduced me to him told me she would take me to the school I was really interested in, but he's like, well, you already got a job, so you don't have to keep talking to anyone. So I was like, I didn't want to make a bad impression and continue to talk to people when I had just accepted. So I left, and from that moment, from the moment I accepted, I started feeling this knot growing in my stomach. I started feeling very anxious, just very uneasy for a few reasons. So this school was not in my area of interest, so it was more than 5 miles away. And when I finally drove to the school the next day. He asked me to go take a ride, check it out, make sure everything was still good. I drove, and in perfect conditions, it took me 25 minutes to get to the school. That was 10 minutes longer than I said I wanted. I know for a lot of you that might not be a big deal, but for the state that I was in, I had already said that I would not accept anything over 15 minutes. So 25 minutes, perfect conditions. However, we live in a place where it rains a lot, and when it rains in this area, it tends to flood a lot. There's usually, I don't know, maybe once a year where we get like a big flood, or where at least where certain roads become inaccessible because of that. So in addition to rush hour, every morning, every evening, the traffic is just ridiculous. So on a daily basis, I would probably realistically be looking at a 40 to 45 minute commute, which was basically gonna put me back in the position that I was in before, that I didn't want to be in. So I could see myself being in a very bad mood and regretting that drive every single day I made it. In addition, they said it was kind of a tough school with some behaviors, which again, that was like the #1 thing that I wanted to get away from when I quit my last teaching job. So then I was like, well, did I make a mistake? I was just questioning myself. That night I got no sleep. The next morning I felt like I was hungover because of the lack of sleep. It just didn't sit well. So I started asking people like, hey, what do you think about the situation? Would it be bad if I like took back my offer or my acceptance? And everybody was very supportive. I was feeling really guilty. I hated to do that to him. So when I went and spoke to him in person, I told him I was feeling a little conflicted about the commute. So he was very kind about it, and he said, think about it. I asked him if he would give me a week, and I think I met him on a Thursday, and he told me he would give me till like Monday or Tuesday. So I said that was fine. And during that time, during those days that I was waiting, I went onto the job portal again. The position he offered me was 6th grade. I noticed that he had a 5th grade bilingual position available. So I called him. I asked him if he would be willing to give me the 5th grade position instead of the 6th grade. Again, this is because I didn't want to deal with behaviors, and I felt like 5th grade would be less likely to exhibit them than 6th grade. He did not hesitate to say yes. I was still not happy. Once I did tell him that I accepted the 5th grade position, I got a call. This was about maybe 2 weeks after the job fair happened, and the principal that I spoke to at the school that I was really interested in, that also had bilingual positions open, called me. So I had already given up on the idea that I was gonna get a call from that school. But turns out she was busy getting a 5th grade teacher hired. So that's why it took her a couple weeks to call me, because she wanted me for a 6th grade position. So she called me, asked me if I was still interested in a 6th grade bilingual position. And of course I told her yes. And I think the interview was scheduled for the next day or maybe 2 days. I want to say she called me on a Tuesday and I interviewed on a Thursday. So I show up for the interview. It was the principal, an assistant principal over the bilingual program, the ELA lead teacher, and a bilingual teacher. So one of the teachers that I would be working with, my LC lead. So it was those 4 people, and of course I show up like 5 minutes late. I was rushing and I was so apologetic. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is the position I want, and I'm late. I don't even remember why I was late, but they were really cool about it, and they were like 2 of them I think were wearing shorts and flip-flops, and they were like super in summer mode. So that worked in my favor. So we have the interview. I felt like everything went great. There was one moment where I was freaking out because they asked me a question and I didn't actually know how to answer the question, and I started getting nervous. I'm not sure if they picked up on that, but the subsequent questions that they asked, I think I answered well. And I think what saved me is speaking to the bilingual person, the person that I would actually be working directly with, which was the science and social studies bilingual teacher. We really built a nice rapport. So that's what I think went best for me during that interview. And by the end of it, I was like, I got it. I got this position. So I'm driving home. The school is less than 15 minutes away and I'm waiting for the phone call. I was that confident that I felt like they were gonna offer that position like immediately. So I didn't get the phone call while I was driving home, but I got home, I think I sat down and I left my phone on the couch. I walked away, and by the time I got back, I had a missed call from the principal, and I was like, I got it. So I called her back, and lo and behold, she was calling to offer the position. I was ecstatic. I was so happy, because even though this was for 6th grade, not 5th grade, it met my other conditions, which was, it was very, very close. Like I said, it's less than 15 minutes away. Don't even have to get on the freeway to get to this school. Whereas the other one I did, and like I said, it would have been like realistically probably a 45-minute commute. Great neighborhood, which I felt would be less of a probability of me having to deal with difficult behaviors, which is one of the things I didn't want to. It was ELA, just, it ticked all my boxes. So I accepted, and then I started to feel that dread because I knew that I had to rescind my acceptance for the other position, which I still hadn't done, because I didn't want to do it without having confirmed something else first. So I started to feel that uneasiness. So I reached out to the principal of the initial school that offered me the job. He didn't answer my call, and I took that as a blessing because I didn't want to talk to him. I was so embarrassed. And so I texted him. Immediately after he didn't answer, I texted him. So yes, I took back my acceptance over text. I don't know if that's like the same thing as breaking up with someone over text. I don't know if it is as bad as that, but that's what I did. So I accepted this other position, and immediately I felt this weight lifted off of my shoulders. It was just not sitting well with me, this other position. And ever since, I have just felt good about it. So I got in right on time, because I think the next week they were gonna start new hire orientation, to the point where I didn't even get like a new hire shirt. Everybody else got a shirt and I didn't, because I was like right at the deadline, so they didn't even have a shirt for me. So I went to new hire orientation. I felt good. I met the people that I was gonna work with. I still felt good. I was excited. And I think I did a week and a half of orientation, and I was thankful for the fact that I had that week and a half of orientation, because after 2 years of working for myself, making my own schedule, not having a boss, it was really hard to put myself in that box again. So I was like, take this as dipping your toe back into a traditional job. And so that's what I did. And every morning when I would drive to work, I would lament my newfound shackles, I guess, because I had gotten into the routine of dropping off my daughter at school, and after that I would go on a walk almost every morning. And now I was like, no, I can't do that anymore. I felt like I was truly grieving a loss. So it was good that I had that time before actually getting students to reacclimate myself into that kind of schedule. So the closer I got to the first day of school, the more anxious I started feeling. So a week and a half of orientation, and then I think I don't know if there was like a full week of working without students. It was something like that. So because everyone else had already been hired, they had already started working on their classrooms, and so I needed to get my class ready. One of the first negatives that I noticed was that at my previous 2 teaching jobs, the first one I started in February of 2020. So that classroom was already set up. I didn't have to do any setting up. My first job that I started from like from start to finish in the school year. They basically provided everything I needed. I could have bought stuff if I wanted to, but I didn't have to because they had so much to give me if I wanted it. This job, my district doesn't do that. They don't provide even, I didn't even get a teacher desk. I had to provide my own desk. So I ended up spending, in a matter of like, I don't know, a week, less than a week, probably like $500. So here we go, back to the struggles of being a teacher. And I think that was the first one, having to get all of those things on my own. I got a teacher desk, I got the classroom decorations, some supplies, bookshelves, a lot of things. So that was that. And the closer I was getting to getting kids, the more nervous I was becoming. I think it was 2 days prior to the first day of school, we were having meet the teacher night. And I was, at this point, I was like losing my mind. I was so nervous. And my students started trickling in. I started meeting them and their parents. And these kids were just the most polite little angels I could have expected. They greeted me. They asked questions, they made small talk, they seemed happy to see me, and their parents were exactly the same. They voiced their support and let me know if you need anything, please reach out, which had not been my experience before. The parents that I had dealt with before were kind of dry. Usually the ones who show up for Meet the Teacher Night are the very active parents and the students who put in a lot of effort. So they usually will be nicer, but never the way that I experienced here at my current school. So that relieved a lot of that anxiety that had been building up. At that point, I felt like I could breathe a little bit again, and then I started feeling excited again. So I started looking forward to meeting the kids 2 days later. So fast forward to the first day of school. I am nervous as heck, and I start meeting my kids, and they're walking in. They are quiet, they are polite, and after a few hours I start realizing that everything is going as expected. So very quickly I realized that things are very different at the school that I'm now in, and that's for the good. There are so many good things going on. What I'm experiencing now as a teacher is kind of what I was expecting when I first decided I wanted to try to go into teaching. One of those things is my team. So this is my third official year as a classroom teacher, and up until this year I didn't really know what it was like to work on a team. My previous position, it was a team of 3, and we were all ELA, and one of the teachers was already with one foot out the door. She was trying to go into high school, so she was studying for her exam, doing all that, and she had 13 years of experience, so everything she did was kind of like without thinking, you know. I was a brand new teacher, so she wasn't very helpful to me. The other teacher also had several years of experience, and she kind of also just did her own thing. So in a lot of ways I was left to my own devices my first year of teaching, which usually I do well with that, but I also didn't know what I didn't know. I could have used their experience, their insight for a lot of things, especially classroom management. One of the things that I think is going well for me this year is that because of the negative experience that I had my first go around with teaching, is that I really looked into strategies for better classroom management, which I went into, I really wasn't prepared, even though they talk to you about that during your certification process. You even do assignments related to that, but for me, that's not something you could really learn, or that's not something that I can really learn until I'm in it. And I just did not anticipate everything that was actually happening. So even the 2 years after quitting my traditional teaching job, because I was still teaching, I was still learning a lot. of engagement strategies, even classroom management strategies, because even though I was now mostly teaching one-on-one, what works for one student often works for a group of students. So I learned a lot in those 2 years that I'm now implementing, and that is working out really well. So with my current team, again, we are bilingual teachers, all 3 of us, and now we do LCs. So my team, instead of being all ELA, is math, science, social studies, and ELA. So it's 3 of us that work together, and I am so thankful that we mesh really well. I think that's one of the reasons why things are working, why we are able to manage these kids, because we put up a united front. Whatever happens in my room also happens in the science, social studies, and math rooms. We are very consistent with them. They know what to expect. They can't come to me and say, well, Miss blah 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 said this, because they know that I'm going to check in with Miss blah 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 to confirm what was said. So that has been so nice. One of the other things that I like is that even though they're in 6th grade, we literally still walk these kids to their other classes, which kind of baffled me when I learned about it, but I kind of like it. I feel like it keeps them in line, which I think they need. So it's good for them, it's good for us as well. And this united front isn't only for the kids, it's also for the parents. Any parent contact, or let's say 97% of them, we do all together. So I haven't had to make parent contacts on my own. Anytime a child gets in trouble or does something they're not supposed to, we all call together, we support each other. And again, the parents are just, they're on our side, and they know that we're just trying to do what's best for the kids. So they're super supportive, and that makes a huge difference. So again, one of the biggest things that I was looking for was being close to my school. I don't have to deal with traffic, because like I said, I don't have to get on the freeway. I live in the Houston area, everything is freeway, but I'm lucky enough to where I can stay in this little bubble that I live in. I don't have to get out of it, and so I don't really deal with traffic in the mornings, which allows me to arrive to work with a clear head, because that was actually very stressful for me at my prior job. And because I'm so close, as most of you know, teachers have a lot of work outside of work. So I often stay after, which is not something that I really ever did at my current position. I always left as soon as I possibly could. The only times I stayed late was when I had to, because if I did stay late, I wouldn't make it home till like 9 o'clock. Now I can. That also has to do with the fact that my daughter is older now. She is a lot more independent, so that frees up a lot of my time as well, which also I think is contributing to my positive view of this work experience. But even if she had been at this point when I was at my previous job, it wouldn't have been as good as it is now. Like, I don't mind so much staying after. First of all, because I'm close, but because of the way that the kids act, it really makes me want to help. I want to do things for them. This was the first time that I decorated my class for Christmas. I put up a little Christmas tree. We did a bunch of Christmas activities. I decorated my door, and I won the Christmas door decorating contest. I really want to pour into these kids and make their experience good, because they are just so grateful and sweet. And there are times, like over the weekend on a Monday morning, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go, you know, I get the Sunday blues. But those kids show up in the morning and they're like, good morning, good morning. They start giving you hugs, they tell you they miss you, and I'm like, okay, I do want to be here. So that dread doesn't last. And because I've been there for so many months now, I know that that dread doesn't last. Like, even now, today it's a Saturday night, I know that when I need to go back next week, even if I start to feel I know I'm gonna get over it, because the kids make it pleasant for me. Another thing is that this current school where I'm at is a lot more structured. So I talked to you about my immediate team, my LC, so the science, social studies, math teacher, and myself, but I also work closely with the actual ELA teachers. So that builds another structure. We really work together to work on what we're gonna teach the kids that week, which I didn't get in my last position. It was kind of like everyone for themselves. We did have a loose scope and sequence, but I had to figure out what I was gonna do on my own, which I love the autonomy, but here I still get that autonomy, but I also have a bit of guidance, and I get to see what other people are doing, and I get to hear other people's thought processes, which I didn't get at the other job. So that anxiety that I used to feel, I don't really have anymore, because I have so many ideas that I'm exposed to that I feel like I just know what I'm doing most of the time. So where am I now? After a full semester, I am starting the second semester. How do I feel about returning to teaching? Well, I still don't regret quitting initially and having that 2-year break. I really needed it. It was the first time in my adult life that I actually had any sort of free time. It gave me a lot of time to reflect, not only on my career, but also on my personal life, which again, I hadn't had time to in the past. So I was able to process a lot of things, and it allowed me for the first time to kind of get over some things, kind of reframe other things. It was very good. And even though I struggled for money during that time, or some part of that time, it was the best thing that I could have asked for. That time off, that time to be home for my kid, to be able to drop her off and pick her up in the afternoons and just be home if she needed me for anything. It was very nice. But I will say that I have confirmed a lot of what I was feeling before about teaching. So some of those things, teachers definitely don't get paid enough. It just is what it is. I never understood that until I became a teacher. I remember as a student, teachers would always say, I don't get paid enough, we don't get paid enough. And I always wondered, I'm like, you drive a Mercedes or whatever, not realizing that a lot of those teachers, you know, they were a dual income household, or they were young single people who didn't have other expenses. Like for a family, unless you do have 2 incomes, it's hard to maintain a certain lifestyle, which is frustrating as a professional, because there are so many requirements for teachers constantly. I'm needing to do, without being asked, no input, I have to do a GT certification. I didn't know I was gonna have GT students. Nobody, like, this was just because I have one GT student that honestly I'm not sure actually should be a GT student, because the student also does advisory, which means they failed their STAR test, and I just don't see like the quality of work, and yet this student is a GT student. But I have to do this certification program, I believe, or PD hours, whatever. I think it's 19 hours if I'm not mistaken, because of this. Nobody asked me. All of a sudden I just received an email, hey, you gotta do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. On top of the fact that I'm still preparing for my BTLPT, which is one of the bilingual exams that you have to take. I already took the first one a couple years ago, and I didn't even remember that I had taken it. So I still have one more test to do. And then as soon as I do that test, I have to get ready for the GT one that I never even signed up for. And that's another thing. I feel like with each passing year, the standard for the kids is just lowered. The standard, the expectations for behavior, their work, it just keeps going down. And like the fact that we can't give students a grade below a 50 kind of baffles me, because I'm like, if that's what they got, then that is their grade. Like some students get 30s, but then with all of the adjustments we do, they actually end up with a 70. So they're passing, even though technically they don't know anything. That to me is absurd. It is keeping kids unaccountable, and that translates to a lot of the behaviors because they feel entitled to so many things, even though what they are putting out is not even close to what they think they are. So like passing with a 70 when your grade is actually a 30, I think is kind of messing with some kids' heads, to be honest. Another thing is for the bilingual certification, again, the stipend is $4,500. It should be double that at least. Well, actually, at least it should be $10,000 in my opinion, because a bilingual teacher has so much more work. We are not only translating on the spot, but a lot of our paper is also translated. We have to do sometimes like double the copies, or we have to make classroom sets in Spanish for the kids who don't know a lick of English, because otherwise you lose them. So at the very beginning, I have 3 classes, and 2 of my classes were great. They were going really well, but I was struggling with one of them because they would like zone out. They would just be talking all the time. So I couldn't figure out at first why I was struggling so much with them and not with the other ones. I was trying to figure out what is different with this group than the other groups. They're the same age, you know, they're still a bilingual class. What's going on? So after 2 weeks, I realized that the other 2 classes, their levels were a little bit higher. They are language levels and their academic levels in general. This other class has more of the newcomers, but generally their academic level is a lot lower. And at the beginning of the year, I had only 6 students out of like 20 who understood any English at all. The rest of them didn't. So when I realized that, I'm like, that's why I'm losing them. They don't get anything I'm saying, because even though it's a bilingual class, everything we teach is in English. We don't do any teaching in Spanish. And that just wasn't flying with that classroom. So when I realized this, I got basically like a captain. So I broke the class down into 6 groups. So those 6 kids who did understand me would then help me help the other students. And that was the one thing I could figure out to kind of reel some of them back in. And lo and behold, of course, another struggle that teachers have to deal with is schedule changes. So now I think I lost 3 of those 6 who understood English. So now in that big group of like 20 kids, only 3 of them speak English. So basically, when I plan as if that class is not like the other classes. It feels like a complete other class. That's a lot to deal with. So $4,500 a year, it's kind of like a slap in the face, just like the general teacher salary is to begin with. So I definitely have not changed my mind on that, even though I'm having a much better experience. I think it's ridiculous, the salary that teachers are expected to be happy with compared to the amount of work that we are expected to do. That also applies for schooling. For a master's degree, you get an extra $1,800. Another slap in the face. You pay how much for this schooling, and all you get in one whole year for all of that additional schooling is not even $2,000? That's a joke. Oh, a big difference that I noticed very soon when starting in this new district is the lack of technology. I couldn't believe it. It's been years since I've even used a desktop, but the fact that we still have like the CD, I don't even know what it's called, where you put like DVDs or CDs, we still have that. Compared to the district where I was coming to, where we had smart boards and we had microphones for the classroom, lots of stuff. My first district that I worked in, every kid had an iPad. My second district, every kid had Chromebooks. Here we do Chrome carts, and at first we only had one. So we really had to like plan well, because 2 teachers couldn't have the Chromebooks in one day because there wouldn't be enough. We did eventually receive another Chrome cart, so now my team is good, but there are other teams that still struggle with that because they only have one. So just in general, my district is known to not have great technology. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It would be cool in some senses. In some others, I think it's great because with these kids, because they're not used to having like free access to technology all the time, they actually enjoy when we do things. At my previous school, I was confused at first, like why aren't they happy when we get to do like computer work? It's because they literally have their computer all the time. It wasn't special to them. Of course, there are all of the administrative tasks that teachers have to do on top of teaching, stuff that takes a lot of time, stuff that you don't find out about until the moment it's needed sometimes. That's just not fun because it feels like you're doing the work of another person with all of this other stuff. Just is what it is. I think all teachers struggle with that. And then the teacher autonomy, maybe. One of my teammates actually got in trouble for providing grades for all of her assignments. I think it's crazy. I couldn't do it. But the fact that she actually got in trouble for doing it, I thought that was kind of like, I don't know, uncalled for. I don't even know what else to say about that, but I just thought it was silly. Again, going back to the standard, some of my kids can't read at all, even in Spanish. It's rough dealing with the spectrum. So, you know, some kids are ready for middle school, or some are very close to like high school levels. And then I have a child who can't read at all. This person can only write their name, and sometimes they get that wrong, and we're in 6th grade. That's a lot. We looked into possibly having this student retained, so being placed at least in 5th grade, even though the student needs to be at a lower level, but it was not possible because of the student's age. So the student is going to just fall through the cracks. The student already fell through the cracks, but they're a new arrival to the country, arrived last year, didn't go to school the entire time. So we are trying to figure out how to best help this student, which is a lot. So even though the students are great, of course there are struggles with behavior. So essentially we have to do a lot of parenting with these kids, which I think it just comes with the territory of being a teacher. But I can see when we are in the hallways that the bilingual teams have a lot less issues with behavior. I see children throwing fits in the hallway. So many students are missing school because of anxiety. I have a background in mental health. I'm all for helping anybody dealing with mental health issues, but there are appropriate and inappropriate ways of dealing with it, and I don't think we have gone in the right direction with this. So, you know, of course, the favorite that they have now, throwing chairs, throwing desks. One of the sweetest teachers at my school got told off by a kid because he was trying to help him. He just said or something like that. That's not something that a professional should ever have to deal with, especially coming from a child. And I'm almost positive that when they called that, if they called that parent, sorry, my phone died. So to continue, one of the biggest struggles that I'm having right now is that I specifically looked into getting into the bilingual program so that I could lessen the chances of having to deal with behavior issues. That worked marvelously. However, I didn't know what I was asking for when I was trying to get into the 4th and 5th grades instead of 6th, because I also thought 4th and 5th would be easier than 6th behavior wise. However, come to find out, maybe, I don't know, a month after starting the job, that my current class, the 6th grade group, is the last group that is taught fully in English. So it's one way. Starting the next school year, so in August, I would be teaching dual language. So 1 week in English, 1 week in Spanish. That is not what I signed up for. To my knowledge, the stipend is the same, but now you're actually teaching also Spanish, and I have no say in this. It's yes or yes, and I either take it or leave it. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. I don't know if I'm gonna stick to my guns and say, no, this is not what I signed up for, and leave, or if I am going to attempt it. But for now, I'm leaning towards no. Honestly, have no interest of doing that. When I see those 5th grade dual language classes in the hallway, again, I see the behaviors. I talked to those teachers and they have literally warned us already. So I'm not sure if I have any interest in sticking around to see how that's gonna be. So I have just a few months to decide. So that's fun. So tips for current teachers or people who are considering going into teaching. I think for me, it really worked to try something different. So if you're already in one role and it's killing you slowly, I think it's worth trying something different. If I knew that I would be staying fully the way that things are now, just teaching solely English, I would be happy to stay. The only reason I'm thinking about leaving again is because of that dual language change. But I think it's important to find first the subject that you enjoy, that you're comfortable teaching, because even though I'm course certified, I would be miserable teaching math. I know this. Something that really worked for me, and it's very clear in retrospect, of course, was thinking about how I felt as a student in the grade that I was teaching. So I was miserable in 8th grade. When I went to 8th grade as a teacher, I got a lot of flashbacks into that time of my life, and the way that the kids acted took me back, and that was not a good feeling. And when I started to think about it, my 6th grade teacher was the reason that I even considered teaching at all. And it was a great year for me. It was probably the best year of all of my education. So that is a tip I would give you. Think about when you really enjoyed being a student, and that might be a good grade or subject for you to look into. My current teaching role feels exactly like what it felt like to be a student in that 6th grade classroom. The kids make me feel, they remind me of my classmates when I was that age. I remind myself of my 6th grade ELA teacher, which is great. So do I think I'll stay in this position? Well, I really think that teaching really is a work of heart. Your heart has to be 100% in it. It really has to feel like your vocation, like this is what you were meant to do. And although I have really loved this job, I'm very happy that I returned, that I gave it another shot, because I was honestly disappointed with myself. The first go around, I thought I was gonna stick with it, but there were just things that I was not willing to deal with. So now that I went back, I feel like if and when I do decide to leave teaching again, I will be doing so at least knowing that I gave it a true shot, and that I actually was good at it when I was at the appropriate level and the correct content. So I am very glad that I went back to take another stab at it. However, I don't actually feel like this is my vocation. This very much feels like a job to me, like just a job. Like I could learn how to do it, I could have pleasant days, and I have very pleasant days. I do love the kids, I have a great time, I love my team, but I don't quite feel like I'm on my path. So I don't plan on staying long term. I plan on returning to school to finish my psychology degree. I have a master's in psychology, but I'm not licensed, so the plan was always for me to go into a PhD, and teaching to me was something viable. Once I was waiting for my daughter to graduate school, I wanted to make enough income and have a decent schedule so that I could kind of balance my life. Ironically, teachers have very poor work-life balance. I didn't know that at the time, but I'm still glad that I went into it. My mother begged me not to go into teaching. She warned me about everything, but I needed to do it myself to know for sure that this wasn't for me. So again, I do plan on leaving, going into psychology, finishing my schooling, getting licensed. However, I do believe that this works for a lot of people. So if you really have an interest, go for it. You know, give it all you've got, try it out, so that in the end you know that you gave it an actual solid try. And with that, I think I will wrap up this talk. Let me know if you have any questions, if you have any concerns that you're currently experiencing, debating whether you should stay or not, going into another field. And thank you for watching.